The light that never sleeps. Hello, wanderer. You found your way to Izora 9. If you're listening in the quiet before sleep, tell me in the comments where you are in the world and what time the night reaches you. And if these stories have become a companion in your dark hours, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell, so the shadows will always have a voice to guide you. Now, let's climb the cliffs where the sea pounds endlessly and a single light still cuts the dark. The widow's lighthouse is waiting. They say grief can build monuments. In Harrow's Point, grief built a lighthouse. The widow who built it was named Mara Kell. In 1894, her husband, a fisherman, was lost at sea. His boat never returned, though his lantern was found floating miles from shore. In her sorrow, Mara petitioned the village to fund a beacon that might save others from the same fate. They refused. So she built it herself. For 3 years, she hauled stone up the cliffs, brick by brick, until the tower rose. She lit its lamp with her own hands, night after night, waiting for a ship that would never return. The villagers began to call it the Widow's Lighthouse. But the light was strange. It never went out. Even in storms that toppled roofs, even when the oil should have burned dry, it kept burning. And ships that sailed near Harrow's Point often reported seeing 2 lights, one guiding them safely, and another lower, closer to the rocks, pulling them toward wreckage. Some swore they saw a figure in the lantern room, though Mara had died decades before. A tall woman in black, her veil trailing, watching the waves for the husband who never returned. I came to Harrow's Point chasing stories of sea myths. The library gave me scraps, local legends, half-erased reports of wrecked vessels, whispers that the lighthouse had been officially decommissioned in 1921, yet still shone each night. When I asked the innkeeper about it, his eyes narrowed. "Don't go there after dark," he said. "The light isn't for you." But of course I went. The cliffs rose jagged against the surf. At their crown the lighthouse stood, stark, bone white, its lamp blazing even though the sky was clear. The door at its base hung crooked, salt-eaten. Inside, the spiral stair creaked with each step, the air damp with brine. Halfway up I saw carvings scratched into the stone walls. Names, dozens of them. Men, women, children. Some crossed out with violent gouges. And at the very top in the lantern room, I found her. Not flesh, not ghost. Something between. A woman in widow's black, veil drawn across her face, tending a flame that burned without oil. She turned as I entered, though her face remained hidden. Her voice was like waves breaking against hollow rock. "You've come to watch for them, too." The lamp flared, throwing my shadow long across the floor. And in its glow, I saw it. Hundreds of shapes moving in the sea below. Not fish, not wreckage. Figures. Standing in the water, half submerged, their faces turned toward the lighthouse. Watching, waiting. The names in the stone. The figures in the water did not move like swimmers. They kept their shoulders square to the tower, as if the sea itself were a staircase and each wave a step they refused to climb. I counted without meaning to. 20, 50. The count tangled in the glare, every face turned upward, expressionless, patient. "A wreck?" I asked, though the sky was clear and the shipping lane empty. The widow's veil shifted in the lamp's breath. "Not tonight." "Then who are they?" "Those the light remembers." The lamp hummed. No wick, no oil, no clockwork, only a round, unwavering eye. Its beam swept the headland in a tidy arc. Then, as if the tower blinked, a second glow budded low among the black teeth of reef. It crawled along the rocks like foxfire. "The lower light," I said. She did not deny it. When the sea calls, I answer. When the deep answers, I turn away. The lower glow brightened, and for a heartbeat the figures' faces flashed, wet hair slicked to skulls, lips pale, eyes like coins. The second light tugged at my stomach, the way a rip current grabs the ankles. I stepped back. The widow let the veil fall. You shouldn't stay after that one wakes. What is it? Every light is a promise. She cupped her hands near the impossible flame, as if warming knuckles that would never again feel blood. Some keep, some unmake. Wind surged against the glass. The figures blurred, the lower glow going out as if pinched. In that instant of dark between sweeps, the tower felt hollow enough to swallow me. When the main lamp shouldered the night again, the water below was empty. I realized I'd been holding my breath. When I exhaled, the room filled with the taste of iron. Come back by day, she said, already turning back to the lens. There are names you'll want to see while your feet still remember land. I returned the next afternoon with salt in my hair and too little sleep. Gull cries frayed into the wind. The tower stood as if it had been poured in a single piece from the color of bone. At the base, the door scraped over a drift of sand, and the staircase rose in a tight spiral, each stone step bowed by a century of boots. Halfway up, the first name appeared, scratched at shoulder height with something sharper than a pocket knife, Emery Vale. Below it, a date, 1897. A second name 2 steps higher, a third across. They were not memorials. They were ledger marks, notched by desperate hands into a ledger that could not be torn free or burned. Some were clean, some were stabbed and gouged, some were rubbed with coal or lamp black to keep them from fading. After every 10th or 12th name, there was a crosshatch, 2 quick cuts like a tally closed. I touched one. The stone was winter cold. At the landing, I found a cupboard warped with salt. Inside, a rusted tin, a quill, 3 bottles of ink gone to clotted scabs, and a log bound in leather white with sea mold. The first page crackled when I turned it. Harrow's Point Light, Keeper's Journal, M. Kell. Her hand was clean and small. The entry for April 4th, 1895 read, Fuel scarce. Beacon kept regardless. Saw a boy on the shoal at half tide. Not a soul in the village lost a child today. Closed the shutters twice. The flame grew bright behind them anyway. August 18th. The lower star is faithful now. It travels the reef like a man with a lantern, only no boots mark the weed. When I beg, it fades. When I blink, it returns. November 3rd. If I let the lamp sleep, will he come? If I never let it sleep, will he find the way? The ocean's mouth is full of vows. The page after had been torn, fibers stuck like knuckles along the spine. Beneath the tear she had written in a different, cramped hand, no sleepers, no drowsers, no drowned. On the stair above the cupboard, the names thickened. Someone had rubbed a few with red earth, others with soot. Isaac John, Wren Lace. Mara Kell, her own name, carved low, as if she'd done it sitting on the step, knife braced, breath tight. 2 steps later, Hollis Perrin followed by a neat X through the lines. A crossed name meant what? Found, saved, claimed. The thought tasted wrong each way. By the time I reached the lantern room, grit had worked into my shoes. The widow wasn't there. Sun lit the lens in prismatic ribs, and dust floated like a patient swarm. From up here, Harrow's Point was a hinge between 2 blues. No ships, no smoke. Even the gulls held off, like priests on the wrong side of a threshold. Alone, the light felt different. The glass didn't sing. It listened. I tried her log again and found a loose sheet tucked near the back, brittle as bark. "There is a price to keep the true flame steady," it read. "Each storm calls for a name in the stair. If no name is given, the lower one will take a vow for itself." At the bottom corner, a smear the color of rust, finger-shaped. I pressed my thumb to the margin, then drew it away quickly as if the paper would bite. For a second the lens flared, a pulse without heat, like a heartbeat against the glass. Far below, something broke the surface, a pale round, a shoulder, a head, and was gone. I left the tower with a mouth full of salt and the feeling of being counted. The innkeeper's hands shook when I set the log on the counter. He refused to touch it. "You shouldn't bring that out," he said. "Paper keeps more than letters." "You've carved your name in there," I said without thinking. 3 steps from the top, Ivor Clark. He stared past me, into a stretch of wall where the plaster had buckled. My boy did," he said. "Night of the nor'easter, 93. I told him we'd be fine, that the roof would hold. He ran up, scratched it with his fish knife so the light would know a Clark still counted. Morning came and the cows were gone and the roof was kindling, but the house stood. The man's throat worked. "He went away the next summer. Followed a traveling crew," he said. "Never wrote." "Did Mara cross out names to say they were safe?" He smiled without humor. "If you're crossed, you're kept. By her, or by it." The glass behind the bar showed me pale and sleepless. He slid the log back across the wood as if it burned. "Turn it to the shelf where your letter begins. That's where the questions get teeth." I found the page. My name wasn't there. Of course it wasn't. Not on paper. Not yet. But when I closed the book, the leather stuck to my palm, and when I pulled free, a thin imprint reddened along my lifeline. 4 tiny dots, then a longer dash. Like a code tapped against skin. That evening, fog braided itself low along the strand. Nets hissed as men hauled them at the tide line, though nothing glittered in the mesh. The bell buoy thudded on a swell. Each time the main lamp swept the headland, the fog picked out the spiral of the tower like a dressmaker's chalk. And each time the lower glow budded on the reef, the bell buoy forgot how to ring, and hummed instead. I climbed again, habit or compulsion, or the tide inside the ribs turning. Names found me where my hand would naturally fall on the curve. Sarah Mott, scratched deep enough to bleed stone. Ned Roper, little more than a whisper. Ella Wynne, crossed again, until her mark was a hole. Between Wren Lace and Jacob Foyle, a new line had been started, shallow, the letters forming as if by their own idea. The dash of an initial, then the faint upstroke of an I. I drew back as if struck. I had not carried a knife. I had not cut the wall. Still, my name had begun in the stair. Air chilled around my wrist. A thin ring of damp closed there as surely as a hand. "Don't finish it," the widow said behind me, soft as tide over slate. "I didn't start it. You brought it close." She stood 2 steps higher, veil like smoke. "Shadows will do the rest if you let them." "What are the crosses?" I asked. "The kept?" She tilted her head. "The fed." "To which?" "The one that never sleeps." "The true lamp?" "Which do you mean by true?" The edge of a smile might have moved under the veil, or it could have been the glass bending light. Words prefer to choose their keepers. Lights, too. She passed me on the inside of the curve without touching. The hair on my arms lifted when she went by. "Come," she said. "If you are to meddle, at least meddle with both eyes." We reached the room under the lamp, the service floor where the gears should have been and weren't. The widow opened a drawer in a workbench scarred by generations of knives and wicks. Inside lay a packet of rubbings, charcoal on thin paper, corners salted stiff. Names taken from the stair, the way a botanist would press leaves. She spread them as a dealer spreads cards. "These are the ones the sea has asked for," she said. "Not the drowned, the promised." Under my fingers, the black smudges made their own wind. Lydia Ree, a rub smooth as smoke. Colem Ayer, small and tight, done by a hand that hated to shake. Mara Kell, her own. On the back of hers, a single line. "If my vow is a wick, let it burn, but let it not be mine alone." Thunder shuffled somewhere far out on the shelf. The room dimmed, not from cloud, but as if the tower were blinking again and could not quickly lift its lids. "What happens if I cross a name?" I asked. The widow's hands paused. "It depends who is looking." I chose Lydia Ree, only because the charcoal had made the lines delicate, and I imagined the person who had taken the rubbing was careful. I held the page up to the lamp's breath. The soot grain glittered. In its texture, 100 vertical lines ran faintly, like rain, or like bars. The lower light came on like an eye opening underwater. Figures climbed from the black. Not literally, the sea did not grow legs. But my mind supplied the motion. An arm here, a shoulder there, hands pale as bellies of fish stroking through the foam toward the base of the cliff. The bell buoy forgot its note again and emitted a long, low vowel that matched the speed of my pulse. "Set it down," the widow said. I put the rubbing back on the table. The lower glow dimmed. A shape at the edge of it, taller than the rest, bare head, broad shoulders, lifted what might have been a lantern and then set it down in the water where it did not sink. "Mara," I said carefully. "Did your husband carry a light like that?" "My husband carried a promise." Her voice had no tremor. "The sea keeps such things longer than men do." "And the lower light? It lives on broken vows?" "It burns them." She smoothed the rubbings, aligning corners. "If there are none, it asks." The storm found its voice then. Rain darkened the glass in quick beads. The first bolt stitched a white seam out beyond the shoals. The main lamp did not flicker, the lower glow brightened by defiance. The widow moved to the lever that did not exist. Her hands curled on air. The beam swung obediently anyway. Below, something answered with a moving gleam, left, right, left, a second sweep. "It will want a name," she said without turning. "Storms cost. A small one might take a goat. A larger one asks a man, this." Lightning blacked the sea for a second, then a wave struck the headland so hard the stone rang. "Will not be small. You feed it with names carved in the stair. If the name is given and kept, the light will not rummage like a thief. If no one gives, it will choose." "How do you choose?" "By who asks me to." She looked toward the village as if the tower had no walls. "Go down. I can help. You can refuse." She finally faced me. Beyond the veil, the suggestion of eyes like polished coal. "Refuse to finish your name. Refuse to look where the lower one shines. Refuse to think your voice is stronger than water. Go." The tower vibrated with the bell buoy's swallowed note. I stepped backward to the stair and found, with my heel, the shallow, fresh cut of the line that had begun my name. "Wait," I said, but I didn't know what for. The widow lifted her hands again to the lamp that didn't need them. "There are promises in the village," she said. "Find one that was broken clean. Bring me its name before the tide turns." "We'll see if the deep will eat that instead of you." She could have meant it as mercy. It sounded like arithmetic. I ran. Rain scissored across the heather. The path down had grown slick, and the cliff wore a skin of spume. The village huddled gray and low, every window a wet coin. Doors stood ajar, not to welcome, but to listen, to gauge what direction the storm's mouth turned. Inside the inn, men stood shoulder to shoulder and spoke without drinking. A woman stoked the stove with kelp rope. The keeper saw me before I reached the counter. "You brought it here," he said, though he meant the weather and not the log. "Who in this town hasn't kept a vow?" I asked too sharply. "A clean one, back to front broken, no excuses left on the bone." The room did the thing rooms do when everyone knows a story and no one wants to own it. Weight shifted, eyes didn't lift. A small girl by the hearth traced circles in a spill of flour with one finger. Her mother's hand froze halfway to her shoulder, as if any more touch might erase her. The keeper cleared his throat. "There's the watchmaker," he said, and the air in the room thinned. "Owes his son 18 years of sober nights. Paid 12. Names mattered. The lamp ran on them. I held mine like a hot coin between my teeth and said, "Where?" "End of Strand." The keeper's mouth tightened. "The house with the clocks that never agree." As I turned to go, the door pushed against a new gust. The bell buoy's wrong note braided into the hinge's cry. At my wrist, the ring of damp tightened, as if something upstairs had measured the distance and set a timer. On the stair of the lighthouse, a shallow cut waited for a letter. In the reef, a second lantern waited for a name. The tide began to turn. I ran. The watchmaker's debt. The Strand was nearly swallowed by the storm. Rain knifed in sheets, and the cobbles gleamed like oil. At the far end, crouched against the seawall, was the house the innkeeper had spoken of. Every window flickered with uneven glow, some fast, some slow, none in time with the others. The effect was like walking past a row of eyes, each blinking at its own pace. A sign above the door had once been painted with a clock face, but the numbers were gone, weathered to ghostly smudges. Only the hands remained, rusted iron, frozen at 11 minutes past midnight. I knocked once. The sound was lost in the thunder. I knocked again, harder. The door opened a crack, and a man's pale face peeked out. He had the look of someone who hadn't seen daylight in years, skin waxy, eyes sunk deep, a jaw that trembled before it moved. "You're early," he said. "I'm not here for a clock." "Then you're far too late." He tried to close the door, but I wedged my boot against it. "I need a name," I said. "A vow broken clean. The lighthouse demands it." At that, his eyes flicked wide. He muttered something under his breath and unlatched the door, ushering me inside with sudden urgency. The air smelled of oil and rust. Clocks hung on every wall, crowding one another. Tall case clocks with pendulums. Carriage clocks lined up in rows. Small gilt faces. Cracked enamel dials, pocket watches nailed like trophies. Each one ticked, but never together. A scatter of seconds, a rain of unsynchronized heartbeats. In the center of the room stood a workbench cluttered with springs, glass, brass gears, all slick with grease. "My son," the watchmaker whispered. His hands trembled as he reached for one of the clocks. I promised him I'd never drink again. He was 10 years old when he asked. 10. I swore on his life. And for a while, I kept it. The thunder rolled overhead, closer now. The windows thumped in their frames. But I fell back. One night, 2 nights, then a year gone, and he left. Said he wouldn't stay to watch me rot. The man's lips drew tight, skin waxy as candle wax. That was 8 years ago. He never came back. Did he drown? I asked quietly. The watchmaker shook his head. I don't know. That's worse. The floor creaked. At first I thought it was the storm, but then I realized the sound was regular, heavy, measured, like a pendulum taller than a man. I turned. In the corner, between two cabinets of ticking clocks, something stood. A grandfather clock with a case of black oak, taller than the rest. Its face was hidden in shadow. But the pendulum inside was wrong. It wasn't brass. It wasn't a weight. It was a heart, gray, wet, beating against the glass with a steady thud. The watchmaker dropped to his knees. Not again, he muttered. Please, not again. The glass of the tall clock creaked. The pendulum heart struck harder, faster, as if it wanted out. And then a sound came from the case. A voice. Young.
Father, the watchmaker sobbed, clutching his head. It's not him. It's never him. It's the dead. The vow I broke. The voice spoke again, muffled by wood and glass. Cross my name. Cross it out. I stepped closer. On the black oak frame, faint scratches formed before my eyes, carving themselves deeper, letter by letter. A name. David Clark. The boy's name. The watchmaker's son. Cross it, the voice begged. My hand shook. I didn't have a knife, but the letters bled as if cut already. A deep gouge appeared through the name, fresh and raw, though I hadn't touched it. The pendulum heart slowed. Once, twice, then stopped. The voice fell silent. The watchmaker collapsed onto the floor, his clocks all ticking out of time, as though mocking him. And I knew. The name had been taken, the vow broken clean. The lighthouse had its meal. When I left the house, the storm had shifted. The rain still fell, but the air felt lighter, less suffocating. Out beyond the reef, the lower light dimmed, just a fraction. But in my wrist, the damp ring tightened again, colder, sharper, as if reminding me, you carry a name too. The tide was not yet finished. The keeper's ledger. The cliffs were slick with rain when I returned. Each step up the spiral staircase felt heavier than the last, as though the stone itself knew what I had done. My clothes stank of oil and wet brass, the stink of the watchmaker's house clinging like a second skin. Halfway up the tower, I stopped at the fresh scratch where my name had begun the night before. The shallow I was still there, damp in the groove as though the stone itself bled salt. I touched it with one fingertip, and the stair shuddered faintly. Not yet, I whispered. The mark did not fade. The lantern room glowed before I even reached it, the light spilling down the steps like water. The widow stood with her veil drawn close, both hands raised to the flame that never burned out. You brought me the name, she said without turning. I didn't bring it, I answered. It was already written. The veil shifted. The sea wrote it. It always does. Her voice had the patience of someone who had lived with storms long enough to forget what calm meant. She motioned to the bench where I had seen the packet of rubbings. A book now lay there, thick, bound in leather like ship's hide, the corners warped with salt. The ledger, she said. I opened it. Pages warped and curled against my fingers, brittle but alive. Each line carried a name, scratched in cramped handwriting, sometimes with dates, sometimes with notes in the margins. 1895, Emery Vale, paid in full. 1897, Wren Lace, refused, taken at sea. 1902, Hollis Perrin, crossed. Storm quieted. Page after page, the pattern grew. Sometimes the notes said kept, sometimes fed, sometimes lost.
Halfway through, I found Marakel's own hand. Her letters were tight and deliberate. My vow is not enough. Each gale asks louder. I cannot feed it only myself. I gave it the fisherman who broke his wedding oath. I gave it the thief who lied about his mother's death. It quieted then, but now it grows again. The sea has no end of hunger. The lamp flared, and the widow's voice rose above the storm outside. Every keeper keeps 2 books, one for oil, one for vows. Which do you think lasts longer? Lightning licked across the glass. For an instant, her veil was lit from behind, and I saw the pale skull of her face, the hollows where eyes should have been, black and endless. You keep the ledger, I said. But who keeps you? She turned then, slow, her veil shifting like seaweed in a current. The sea. A crack split the air. The flame in the lamp stretched high, bending as though pulled by a current only it could feel. And below, through the glass, I saw the reef light flicker alive again. The lower glow. Figures gathered near it, pale shoulders breaking the surface, heads bobbing in the foam. More this time, dozens more. Their faces turned upward, waiting for the next name. I looked back at the ledger. The last entry had no name at all, only 3 words in ink that had bled wide into the paper. The next is yours. The widow closed the book with a sound like a coffin lid. Every storm that passes writes itself here. But the storm brewing tonight will not leave with only one name. How many? I asked. Her veil shifted as she faced the sea. As many as it wants. The glass rattled in its frame. The stone underfoot shook with the surf's roar. The lower light brightened, white and sharp, hungry as a fang. And from the stair below us, the sound of carving, stone splitting, letters scratching, my name, finishing itself, the names that finish themselves. The sound from the stairwell rose like teeth grinding. Letter by letter, gouges etched themselves into the stone. I knew without looking that my name was there, finishing itself in salt and iron. The widow did not move. She stood in the lantern's glare, her veiled face turned toward the sea. You hear it, she said. The tower writing you down. I didn't carve it. No one ever does. I forced myself down the spiral, lantern in hand. The steps were slick with condensation, trembling underfoot. When I reached the mark I'd seen before, the shallow I froze. The letters had deepened, clean and sharp. My full name gleamed wet as if written in blood. And worse, another name was forming beneath it. Letter by letter, shallow at first, then deeper, more frantic. Not mine, not the widow's, someone else's. The stone shuddered with each stroke. The sound was louder than the storm itself. I backed away, nearly stumbling, but the stairwell bent strangely now. Each turn seemed longer than it should, the descent unending. Shadows stretched across the curve and voices whispered from the walls. Cross me out. Cross me out. Names blurred into one another as though the stair was alive, reshaping them. 12, 24, all carving themselves fresh. David Clark, Emery Vale, Sarah Mott, and others I didn't know. Every name I touched pulsed with warmth, like flesh. When I reached the ground floor, the doorway gaped black. Rain lashed in sideways, driven by the gale. But in the mud outside, new letters carved themselves into the earth, long gouges trailing toward the cliff's edge. The ground itself was writing. I turned back. The widow was at the top of the tower, haloed in the impossible flame. Her veil streamed in the updraft, and she raised her arms wide. The ledger lay open at her feet, pages turning in the storm's breath. You think you choose the names? she called down. Her voice carried like thunder. But it is the sea, always the sea. It remembers who lied, who broke, who swore, and failed. The storm crashed against the cliffs, and the lower light flared. Dozens of figures now, no, hundreds, waded in the foam, eyes pale, mouths open. Their voices joined the wind, chanting names, dragging them from the stones, from the walls, from my own chest. One voice louder than the rest, my own. The carving at my wrist flared cold. The ring of damp tightened until it burned. I looked down and saw the 13th mark beginning there. Not a name, but a symbol. The jagged alien letter I had once seen in Black Hollow School. The lighthouse was not just keeping names, it was teaching them. The widow's voice boomed again, layered with something deeper, inhuman. One vow feeds a gale, but tonight is not a gale. Tonight is a maw. It will eat until the ledger is full. The lower light split in two, then three. More beacons budded along the reef, like eyes opening one after another. The sea below seethed with white shapes pressing against the shore, and the stairs shuddered, more letters cutting themselves into the stone. A chorus of names, a chorus of debts. I stumbled back up toward the widow, clutching the ledger as the storm raged around us. The book thrummed in my hands, heavy as an anchor. Every page now bore only one word, written over and over. Yours, yours, yours. The tower rang with it. The sea screamed with it. And I realized the storm wasn't after a village, or a ship, or a herd. It was after me. The sea's ledger. The ledger weighed like stone in my arms, but the pages turned themselves in the wind, each one screaming the same word. Yours. The widow stood by the flame that never faltered. Her veil snapped in the storm's breath, and for the first time she lowered it. Her face was pale as bone, hollow-eyed, lips thin and gray. Yet it was not death I saw. It was weariness. Centuries of standing between the sea and the living, feeding one to save the other. You see now, she said, the light was never mine. It was never his. It belongs only to the deep. I am only its keeper. The reef below boiled. 3 lights had become 6, then 12, each bobbing like lanterns carried by unseen hands. Between them, the pale heads of the drowned rose and fell with the waves. Their mouths moved in unison. Names, names, names. The stone underfoot trembled with their hunger. The tower itself groaned, as though it might topple into the sea if not satisfied. I clutched the ledger. It won't stop with me, will it? No. The widow's voice cracked like old rope. It never stops. But if you cross your name, it will sleep, for a time. And if I don't? Her hollow eyes found mine. Then it will write for you. And it will not stop at one name. It will take the village. It will take the strand. It will take until its book is full. The stair shuddered again. I looked down and saw new letters gouging themselves into the stone, frantic, dozens at once. Not just my name now, but others. The innkeeper, the watchmaker, the child at the hearth. Every soul in Harrow's Point. The ledger's ink bled wider, the pages wet, as though the sea itself was writing. The widow pressed her palm flat against the lens, the flame searing through her hand. Choose, she said. Cross yourself, or watch them all burn. Lightning split the sky. In its flash, I saw the drowned clearer than ever. Men, women, children, all standing waist-deep in the surf, their eyes coins of pale fire. At their head, a tall figure raised a lantern of black iron. The lower light swelled in its cage. He tilted his head. and though his mouth never moved, I heard him as clearly as thought. Cross it. Cross it out. Be ours, and let them live. The widow flinched, veil snapping shut again. "He has been calling since the night my husband sank," she whispered, "and I have been answering ever since." The ledger burned in my hands. My name was there, written clean, waiting. My wrist stung where the damp ring had become a brand. The sea roared, demanding, promising. And for one impossible moment, I saw a choice: to cross my name, feed the storm, and let Harrow's Point sleep another season, or refuse and let the sea take them all, every vow, every oath, every broken promise, dragging the village into its maw. The widow raised her arms. The lamp flared white, cutting the storm in half. The lower lights screamed in answer. "Decide," she said. "The sea is patient, but not tonight." The page fluttered, waiting for the stroke of a hand that was no longer mine. The flame, the sea, the stone, all breathing the same word. Yours. The crossing of names. The storm's roar folded in on itself, a hollow silence that pressed against my ears until my skull ached. The ledger gaped open in my hands, its pages wet and alive, each line pulsing like veins. The widow's voice cut through the quiet. "Cross it, with ink, with blood, with breath. It does not care. Only the mark matters." I looked down at my wrist. The damp ring had widened, the skin raw, the shape of a letter gouging itself deeper. It was my name being written into me. The drowned figures on the reef raised their heads together, mouths yawning open. Their chant carried even through the storm. Yours, yours, yours. The tall figure at their front lifted the iron lantern high, its black glow spreading across the foam. The reef lights flickered, swayed, leaned toward me like hungry mouths. "If I cross my name," I said, "will it stop?" The widow's veil trembled. "For a season, perhaps a year. The sea always returns." "And if I don't?" Her hollow eyes turned to the village below. The cottages crouched against the rain, each window glowing faint, fragile. The innkeeper's fire, and the watchmaker's lamps, a child's candle. "They will all be written in your place," she whispered. The ledger grew hotter. I touched the page. The ink shifted beneath my finger, forming the strokes of my name. All that was left was the final cross, the cut that would end it. The widow pressed her hand against the lens. The impossible flame bent, flared, blazed brighter than lightning. "Do it!" she cried. But another voice rose, deep as the tide, rolling from the reef. "Do not cross. Refuse. Refuse, and it will be theirs. Refuse, and it will never end." I lifted my hand. The storm held its breath. The drowned leaned closer to the cliffs. The widow's veil whipped across her hollow face. And then I drew the line. The ledger screamed. The stroke burned black across my name. The tower shook as if struck by a wave taller than the world. The flame in the lantern room roared, and every lower light on the reef went dark at once. The drowned figures shrieked, their mouths stretching wide. One by one they sank, pulled down by unseen hands, their pale faces vanishing beneath the foam. Only the tall figure with the black lantern remained, his light guttering but not gone. He turned his head toward me, slowly, as though memorizing my face. Then he too dissolved into the waves. Silence. The storm broke apart, its weight lifting from the cliffs. Rain thinned to mist. The bell buoy rang a true note once more. The ledger lay still in my hands. My name was there, crossed, final. The widow lowered her arms. Her veil fell slack. "It is done," she said, but her voice was no relief, because I understood now. It was not finished. It was only sleeping. The flame in the lamp dimmed to its usual glow, steady, eternal. But in the reflection of the glass, I saw my own face pale and hollow-eyed, a veil of shadow falling across it. The widow turned back to the lens, shoulders bowed beneath centuries. "You are keeper now," she whispered. "The sea will wake again, and when it does, the ledger will open to your hand." I closed the book. It was heavier than before, and beneath my palm, faint and relentless, a new word formed in the wet ink. Next, the last keeper. The storm had passed, but the silence it left behind was heavier than thunder. The air clung to my lungs like damp cloth. The widow did not move. She stood in the lantern's glow as though the years had folded back over her, veil hanging limp, hands still. I thought she might crumble to dust where she stood, but when she turned, her hollow eyes fixed on me with terrible certainty. "It has chosen," she said. I looked down. The ledger in my hands throbbed faintly, like a second pulse beneath my ribs. The word written last glistened on the page. Next. And beneath it, a line half-formed. Not a name yet, only the suggestion of one. My hand twitched as though it were waiting for me to finish it. "I crossed my name," I said, though the words tasted of salt and guilt. "Why isn't it enough?" The widow stepped closer. The scent of brine and rot rose from her veil. "Because one name never ends a storm. It only begins a season. The sea is endless. It will ask again, and again, and again." Her voice was almost kind. "Now it asks through you." I staggered back. The lantern flame did not waver, but the stair below groaned, and faint scratching echoed up the stone. New names, names of those still alive. The innkeeper, the watchmaker, the girl with flour on her hands. Every soul in Harrow's Point was being written. "No," I said, clutching the book. "Not them. Not now." The widow's veil rustled, as though moved by a breath that wasn't there. "Then who? If you don't cross, the lower light will choose for you." I slammed the ledger shut. The sound cracked through the chamber like a whip. For a heartbeat, the flame dimmed as though surprised. The widow froze. Her voice was smaller when it returned. "What are you doing?" "Ending it," I said. "If the light exists only to feed the sea, then it doesn't deserve to shine at all." I turned and hurled the ledger into the lamp. The impossible flame swallowed it whole. The pages curled, blackened, split. But instead of smoke, a torrent of seawater burst from the book's spine, flooding across the glass. The lamp screamed. The tower shook. The lower lights on the reef blazed in panic, then guttered, one by one, like dying stars. The widow shrieked, veil whipping into nothing. Her face collapsed into shadow, dissolving as though unstitched from the world. "Fool!" her voice howled. "The sea will only bind you tighter." The flame tore itself apart, collapsing into a single burning word in the air above the glass. Keeper. It struck me like a brand. My knees buckled. The stair rattled with the weight of names unfinished. The sea roared its fury, waves hammering the cliffs, but the lower light was gone. The drowned had vanished with it. All that remained was the main lamp, dimmer now, yet unextinguished, and me. When dawn broke, the storm was a memory. The village still stood. The inn's fire still smoked. Children still cried. But in the lantern room, only one figure remained. Not the widow, not Marrakel, only me, staring into the impossible flame, its reflection hollowing my eyes, its voice echoing in my chest. The ledger was gone, but the book was not. It had rewritten itself inside me. I understood at last. The widow had not been cursed. She had been chosen. And now, so had I. Even now, the lamp burns. I keep it. I tend it. And each night, as the waves crawl against the cliffs, I hear the reef whisper. It does not say yours anymore. It says only one word, over and over, in the voices of those I failed to save. Next. The widow's lighthouse ends here.
But the light does not sleep.